Okay, Chair, when you're ready, we are now live on YouTube, so you can start the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Debbie. Good afternoon and welcome to the virtual Standards Committee meeting of East Devon District Council on the 14th of September 2021. As your chair, Councillor Ian Thomas, I'd also like to welcome viewers of our live stream on YouTube. In addition, I'd like to welcome two new independent people, I believe that's the right term, or independent persons, Diana Coe and Pat Coulter, and a new independent representative, Robert Wood. Welcome to the three of you. Could I remind everyone that due to concerns relating to COVID risk, our council has delegated much of its decision making to senior officers for the period to the 17th of January 2022. Consequently, this afternoon will be a consultative meeting only. However, we will work as closely as possible to normal procedural rules as detailed in our constitution. Where our meeting would normally have decided a matter, it will now make recommendation to a senior officer. That officer will take our recommendation into account when making their decision. May I remind members that the code of practice applies throughout this meeting and we reserve the right to disconnect any disruptive participant. Should there be a break in internet connection or a power cut, please bear with us as we try to reconnect. Should we not be successful within 15 minutes, we'll consider the meeting adjourned and reconvene at a later date. Could colleagues please ensure any telephones are either off or silent and that microphones are muted when not in use to avoid disturbance from background noise. Should you wish to comment, please raise your electronic hand and wait to be called. We'll now start the meeting with a roll call of committee members. Could I pass over to you, please, Debbie?
Thank you, Chair. I'll start with our council members, please. Councillor Thomas.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Barrow.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner, I cannot see online, or Councillor Johns. Councillor Loudon.
Afternoon, Debbie. Yes, I'm present.
Thank you. Councillor Rylance.
Present.
Great, thank you. Councillor Twist.
Present.
Thank you. Moving on to our town and parish representatives. Councillor Bob Nelson, I don't see online, so I suspect that's his apologies. Councillor Pauline Stott.
Present.
Thank you, Pauline. Moving on to our independent persons. I don't see Diana online, so I'll move on to Pat Coulter, please.
Present.
Great, thank you, Pat. And our independent representatives, Martin Goscombe, please.
Present.
Thank you, Martin. And Robert Wood, please.
Present.
Great. Thank you, Chair. I can confirm your quorum. Back to you.
Thank you very much. Could I just ask very briefly that Councillor Loudon be prepared to take over as Vice Chair in the event that my connection drops out, which, as you know, it does have a habit of doing periodically. So, John, if you could do that for me, should it be necessary. Thank you very much. Agenda item 1 is public speaking. I've got no members of the public registered to speak. Agenda item 2 are minutes of the last meeting on the 19th of January 2021. If any members wish to comment on the minutes, could you please raise your electronic hand? If none's raised, I'll take it we're content the minutes be recommended for senior officer approval. I'm not seeing any hands, so on to agenda item 3, apologies. Debbie, could I have any apologies, please?
So, Chair, the only apologies I can give are from Councillor Bob Nelson, who's a town and parish representative. I don't have any others.
Thank you very much. On declarations of interest, item 4, rather than doing the roll call as normal, to move things along, could members please indicate if they have any declarations of interest they wish to make? Again, I'm not seeing any, so I assume nobody has any declarations of interest. Matters of urgency, agenda item 5. I've got no matters of urgency today. Agenda item 6, confidential exempt items. I have no confidential or exempt items which officers recommend should be dealt with in this way. So we'd like to get straight on to agenda item 7, East Devon District Council Standard Regime Update. And Henry, I believe you're going to lead off on this, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon all. So this is a composite report now. It's following a similar title that we've had for a number of standards committees. And in light of the fact that recommendations are now being made to senior officers, I've curtailed the recommendations section to hopefully make it as succinct as it needs to be. But the detail of the report covers now the assessment subcommittee. For those who were present at the in-court meeting back in April, this was discussed, the procedure was discussed and we went through it. Essentially, it is an extra step in the process, if you like, which introduces a member assessment subcommittee at the early stage of the process. There are other sort of refinements to the process as well, but they're all detailed in the report. And the recommendation is really for this committee to decide whether or not it wants to adopt a new procedure or carry on as was. Probably the one change that has happened since the April meeting in terms of the procedure that's in front of you is in relation to member training. And I picked that up at the end of the report. The member working group that has now met to consider the members' code of conduct against the LGA model code discussed the issues of training and were quite keen that if a sanction is imposed on a district council member, the costs of that training are picked up by the district council. So the procedure has been revised to reflect that. And I'm asking that the committee recommend to council that there is a budget of £5,000 set aside for that. And that's irrespective of whether or not you wish to adopt the new procedure with the assessment subcommittee. The other aspect in terms of the working group that I'd like to touch on is the member officer protocol. It is part of the standards committee remit to review that. That sits within your jurisdiction, if you like, and it's something that has been flagged up before, but it is obviously perhaps more of a live issue now than it has been for a while, and it is something that needs review. And Cabinet recently considered a report in which they recommended that the standards working group pick up on this piece of work as well. So I've incorporated that, and I think it will be helpful if this committee informally endorsed the standards working group taking on that piece of work. And if the committee were so to recommend, then obviously I would pick that up with the working group at its next meeting, which I think, if I remember rightly, is in October. And I think that's probably, oh yeah, sorry. And then the final bit, obviously, just because we're not doing noting, I've included the 2 complaint updates at the end of the report for members to see. And obviously, I'm happy to go through those and answer any questions there may be, or indeed on anything else. And particularly, of course, the procedure that is before you to consider. So thank you, Chair. I'm happy to be involved in any questions or discussion as there may be.
Thank you for that, Henry. I've got Eleanor first, please. Eleanor, would you like to speak?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report, Henry. So I have 2 questions. My first question, I hate to go straight for brass tacks, and I fully understand all the reasons behind why we would want to set a budget aside for training purposes, because we can't find people, et cetera, and effectively imposing on people some training that costs money would be a fine. So in terms of the budget line, is that per year? And if it's not used up in any one year, is it carried over to the following year and added to, or is it just kept topped up to £5,000 at all times? So those are my questions.
So where's Simon Davey when you need him? So it will be a £5,000 budget line that sits within the Democratic Services budget, and each year there will be a £5,000 budget line. So effectively, it will be reported as an underspend if it isn't used, and obviously, if we were to go over, it will be an overspend. But essentially, there's a £5,000 line that can be used, and unless council chose to take it out in the following year, it would run on year on year.
Thank you very much. It's all very quiet here. I've had no more questions or speakers at all. Is there? I think Martin.
Yes, I had a couple of questions to Henry, really, about the work of the working group. Firstly, I was going to ask whether now we know that they're going to be looking at the protocol for relationships between members and officers. Am I right in thinking that when they've done that work and they've formulated some suggested changes or recommendations, those will come to this committee at a future meeting? Yes,
that's correct. And it's the same for the members' code of conduct. Essentially, it is this is starting off in a member-led environment. So the first piece of work we've done is essentially go through them, pretty much all of the main wording within the model code, assess it against our code of conduct, tweaking it as necessary. Now that composite version of a proposed new code of conduct will come back to this committee, and I would expect the same to happen for the member officer protocol.
Okay, and I had a follow-up question, which is that I'm aware that there's a sort of related code, which is the code of conduct for employees, which this committee also reviews from time to time. Would it be logical for the working group to add the code of conduct for employees into their work streams so that they are reviewing all three more or less at the same time and making recommendations to the committee, rather than maybe do the code of conduct for employees at some later time?
If this committee wanted to make that recommendation to the working group, I don't have a problem with that.
Okay, it seemed logical perhaps to include it all three together, if that's possible.
Is that a proposal?
I'm not sure I'm allowed to make proposals.
Well, that's what I was trying to work through then. Because
a member might run with it.
Well, it was a very big sprat though, Martin. I think what I've got at the moment is I've got Councillor Miller and then Councillor Loudon. Councillor Miller, do you want to comment before I go to Councillor Loudon?
Yeah, please. I cannot make recommendations either, as I'm not on the committee.
No, I do recognise that as well.
But no, I just wanted to speak in support of what Martin Goskman just said, and I had actually identified that, but I probably wouldn't have remembered to have mentioned it. It does make sense because the whole protocol of relationships between members and officers are drawn on the rules for both members, the code of conduct for members, but also the code of conduct for employees. So it would surely follow that to review all of them at the same time would ensure that all the documents work together as a whole. That's kind of what they need to do, and we don't want any inconsistencies between the documents, because that will, that won't be good. That could cause some disagreements. So yeah, completely support what Martin was saying, but as I say, Chair, I cannot do anything to recommend it. Thank you for letting me speak, I must say.
And we're very good like that, Paul. Councillor Loudon, John.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, interesting. I emailed you not so long ago trying to set up a meeting with somebody else to talk about some staffing related matters, and this was on my list of things to ask the question about. So we've been beaten to it. So I'm happy to pick up what Martin has put on the table. I can be am I the sprat, or am I what the sprat has caught here?
I couldn't possibly comment, but a proposal would be welcome.
I'm very happy to propose it, and it does make some sense if we're going to try and get everything reviewed and get all our ducks in a row, as it were. So yes, there we are.
Lovely. Do I have a second, please, from committee members? Oh, two. Councillor Barrow. Dean, do you want to speak at this point?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just want to second this proposal. It seems sensible. So let's put some more work Henry's way.
I'm not actually sure it's Henry's way. Councillor Rogers. I was giving you the out there, Henry. You keep telling me I'm too prescriptive sometimes, so I was giving you the option to direct it elsewhere. But on the basis you've accepted it, then yes, it's yours. Councillor Ireland, Eleanor, did you want to speak on this?
No, I just wanted to be the second if you needed one.
Sorry about that. You'll be the thirder. The wrong button. My apologies for that. That's the joys of working with a new system, testing it out live. Okay, so I'm losing speakers here, or don't actually seem to have any. So on the face of it, what we do need now, I've got the recommendations that are on. Hang on, let's get this right. That are on page. recommendations are on page 7. Page 7, 2 recommendations which determine whether to recommend to council a revised procedure under Appendix 1, which seems again not to have raised a lot of comment. I have a couple of comments in there. The only thoughts I would have had on there is that in the same way as the chair doesn't sit on the working group, on the basis that I think it would be too weighty at that point to potentially have a chair with a vote on this committee and also potentially a casting vote. So I think that also, again, that the chair should avoid sitting on the other committee as well, the early stage committee on the same grounds. Don't know whether anybody's any thoughts or support of that or what. Councillor Loudon.
Chair, I just wanted to pick up on your comment about people not interjecting. It seems to me this is the first time I've sat on this committee, so I think it would be probably unreasonable for me to start unpicking what is in front of us, because my understanding is this has been considered previously, and unless you tell me otherwise, I believe this to be the sort of the outcome of previous discussions. In light of that, I'm happy to propose the 2 recommendations, if that helps you.
I think it does. And Councillor Rylance, would you like to comment to speak at this point again?
Yes, please, Chair. I just wanted to say, I thought that in previous discussions about this, we had mooted the idea of the membership of the sort of pre-screening committee being drawn from all the councillors. At any time, anybody could be called upon to be part of that committee as a way of familiarising people with the code of conduct. So, you know, sort of on-the-job training, so to speak. And I just wonder whether we discounted that idea, because I didn't remember whether we had or not, in favour of having a very determined committee, set committee. I think there may be a legal reason why we can't.
Yeah, interesting. Unless I read it incorrectly, my reading of the proposal was that it was drawn from the committee here. Maybe I've misread that. Henry, have I got that wrong, or is that what it does say?
Yeah, it is. It's drawn from the Standards Committee itself, which had obviously been increased from 5 to 7 as part of the. Well, I think there was a rationale for it anyway, wasn't there? Not least because it was in court last time round. But that would help facilitate being able to draw the assessment subcommittee and the hearing subcommittee and having them distinct from each other. Councillor Ryan is right. You did mention it. I think I'm not sure it got the support of the general will there. Not least. In a sense, it was in court anyway, but I don't think. I mean, I think the difficulty is that it's the balance between trying to make it a committee that's got the experience to be able to deal with it, and also then not having the problems of trying to draw across 60 members, and of course you've got the proportional representation issues that flow from it as well, notwithstanding because it is a subcommittee of the Standards Committee. So there are difficulties with it legally, I would say. I mean, I'm quite happy that we can go away and do some more work on that. I haven't sort of looked at it chapter and verse, but I think the moving members around between the 2 committees will help get the experience that's required. So it's not always the same individuals who do it. You know, we try and draw them at random as best as possible. So my view is, I think perhaps see how we go with this, and then if there is a desire and it works, then you want to increase the size of the committee to give increased experience. That's always something that can be done.
Okay, but could I have some feedback on my comment, though, in that same context, that it shouldn't include the chair of the Standards Committee? It's silent on that in my reading of the guidance, but on the other hand, personally, I think that probably will be a weakness or could be perceived as one.
I'll happily give a comment. My comment when you said it. I personally don't see that there's an issue with it, because the idea of the assessment subcommittee is that both the chair and those who sit on it rotates. So all that happens is that you would be, anybody who sits on the assessment subcommittee would then be precluded, unless there's a quality issue, from sitting on the standards hearing subcommittee if the need arises. Now, we know that we only have had 3 probably in the last 5-6 years, I think, give or take. So actually the likelihood of being barred further down the road is pretty low, I would say. So I wouldn't see it as a bar. If that was the will that the chair doesn't sit on the assessment subcommittee, that's fine. It narrows the options to draw, but I mean, it's for the committee to decide really, but I personally wouldn't have any issues with it.
Okay, well, I mean, I'm happy to take counsel from colleagues on that, but I would imagine that the standards hearing would normally be chaired by the chair of the standards committee. And on that basis, that was my suggestion, that actually there was an argument in terms of speeding the democratic process and reducing the risk of any challenge. Not necessarily from a personal point of view, but I'm trying to look at arrangements here that are sound down the line, where the profile of the chair might be slightly different or viewed differently by colleagues in the council. Happy to go either way, but and I don't want to flog that particular horse, but it was just something that jumped out at me from reading through the notes. Right, I've got then Councillor Stott, or former Councillor Stott. Sorry, Pauline.
I'm still a councillor, don't worry. What I'd like to know is, as an independent or parish councillor now, who is on the working group? And it would be nice to know who is on that working group, the sub-working group that Henry's been working with. And also, I would like to say, if with these recommendations go ahead, then they can't actually be sanctioned, not until the AGM in May, because it's a change in the constitution. And I think you can only change a constitution at an AGM. Is that correct, Henry?
No, you can change the constitution at any time.
Oh,
it's normally approved at the annual meeting. That's the process. When the constitution is adopted, that's when it's adopted. That's being the formalities, but you can amend it at any point, as long as it's only full council that can do that.
I see. And that's a live full council, is it, or is it now the officers that do it?
Well, it depends. So the intent, as written in the report, would be that let's just assume that the committee recommend the adoption of the revised procedure, is that this would then go to October's council to get effectively council's endorsement to that. And I would then bring back to December's council the necessary changes to the constitution to bring it into effect. So that would be December. So yes, that would then be a recommendation to officers to implement.
Thank you. And also, who are on the working group? Sorry, just would like to know, and I'm sure the other independent members would like to know as well.
And there's no problem with that, Chair. So it's So I've got councillors Armstrong, Bailey, Blakey, Brown, Gardner, Hayward, Ingham, Loudon, Skinner and Ragg.
Oh, so they're not actually drawn from this meeting. They're not actually drawn from the standards meeting.
No, it was separate. No, and it was a member group.
And I do agree with Ian that I think the chair should only be at the stage, is it 3? Is it not at the first sub hearing to sort out whether it's a breach or no? I think it should go to the next one. Does that make sense? He's looking a bit confused.
Me or Ian?
No, I'm not confused at all.
Must be me then. Stage 5 is the subcommittee.
Thanks for that, Pauline. Oops, sorry. Thanks for that, Pauline. I've got Councillor Miller. Paul.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I wanted to move it. Well, can I move us back to the discussion we were having about Councillor Rylance's suggestion, or do you think we've moved past that now? I just had some comments about the fact that in principle it's a really, really good idea, but in practice it could be pretty much an administrative nightmare, right? In terms of
taking the recommendations of the monitoring officer at this point that we don't follow that route, then my inclination is certainly not to push that at this point.
But wasn't there, because I'm trying to recall the last discussion, wasn't there a conversation about trying to encourage the party leaders or the group leaders to alternate the members of the standards committee generally over time, so it broadened the democratic process? I thought that was the alternative. You might not have been chairing that committee, Ian. Sorry.
It's a little bit being blamed for your predecessor's sins, isn't it? No, I'm totally honest. I don't recall that, and I have seen the recording of the meeting, but I don't recall that being mentioned. So I mean, I'm inclined to stick where we are if there's no wild objection to that. Councillor Loudon, John. Sorry, Councillor Loudon, John.
Do you want to take Robert first?
I was following you in strict order, irrespective of your status, John, which I thought you'd like.
I have no status. Thank you. Right, to come back to the questions you posed. I'm not over fussed about the point that you make about the chair not attending. To be quite honest, with greatest respect, I think you may be overthinking this one. Heaven forbid. If you wished, you could always ask your vice chair, whoever. No, the serious point. You could ask the vice chair to take that meeting if that was a concern to you. And just picking up on the point that Eleanor raised, I personally wouldn't be in favour of trying to have all and sundry attending the assessment meetings, and the whole issue about encouraging leaders of the various groups to rotate their membership. That's all very well in principle, but the reality often is for group leaders trying, one, to find willing volunteers, and two, it then also precludes internal group decisions for whatever reason they put people onto the various committees. So I personally don't see that as something necessary to pursue.
Thank you for that. Robert, welcome again.
Thank you. It was just the monitoring officer gave the makeup of the subcommittee that would consider these policies. I just wondered what arrangements are made in the specific case of the employee one, because presumably if not already present on that committee, it would need to be widened to include whatever appropriate staff representation is applicable at East Devon District Council, be that unions or whatever, if you're amending the policy that it affects its employees.
Thank you for that, Robert. Henry, have you any comment on that, as well as obviously what you were going to raise?
Yeah, and actually, whilst I was thinking about that, I've forgotten what I was going to raise in the first place. I think it was just the suggestion about the group leaders rotating their members through it, which, and I think everybody's saying the same. In principle, that's a very good idea. It's the practicalities that will dictate it, and I think if the members, if the standards committee wanted to suggest to the group leaders that's what they should do to get the experience, the knowledge, then I think that's laudable. It will just be the practical realities that probably make it a bit more difficult. In terms of the employee code of conduct, so when we've reviewed that before, and it's happened a couple of times, every couple of years it gets reviewed anyway. We haven't routinely taken it back through the unions. I have to say, I don't know whether that's the right thing to do. I think it probably is if one's going to be looking to change it. In terms of it going through to the working group, I don't have a particular issue having staff representatives on there. In essence, I can act as the representative at that first port of call, and if there are going to be changes arising from it, then obviously I can pick that up as necessary. So I don't think we need to have an employee on that working group, but my job in essence is to make sure that the interests of both the council and the employees in that context are looked after. So I will take that at first instance.
Thank you very much. Martin.
Yes, I had one other point of detail for Henry on the detailed procedure, or detailed process, which is on the first page. There's a set of definitions which effectively set out the key players in the whole process. Would it be useful, now that we've got a specific role for independent representatives on the assessment subcommittee and the hearings subcommittee, if we added into the definitions some text about the independent representative?
And presumably the town and parish rep as well, I presume. Yeah. I'm happy to do that, Chair.
Is that something you want to do now, or will you do offline, Henry?
I'll do it for you. If members are happy to recommend to council to adopt the procedure with those corrections, whatever those corrections are that we identify through the meeting, then I'll happily take it away and do it offline. Yeah.
Yeah, there was one occasion within the report that there's an inconsistency in terms of how something's specified, but I'll highlight that to you offline. It doesn't need to be raised now. What I do have here is I've got, and in terms of recommendations, obviously we have the two that Councillor Loudon's moved, seconded by Councillor Barrow. But what we don't have there is the specific inclusion of the officer member protocol within the working group's remit work stream, as was proposed, as was suggested earlier on. Can we add a form? Would this be the right spot to add that in, Henry, or not?
And the reason I wrote informally agree to it was that, as things stand, if this committee was to recommend a revised or adopting the revised procedure and also the budget for training, they're both onward recommendations to council, so there'll be no senior officer decision required from today. So if you were to informally agree to the working group taking on the member officer protocol and also the employee, that's absolutely fine. I'll take it away to the group and action that, and then it will save me having to do a decision, if that's okay.
So we don't do that. Yes, I just wanted to make it right, obviously recognising the current circumstances. I didn't want it to fall down the hole between the cracks. So you're happy with, as we stand, with just the two recommendations there?
Yeah, but if the committee are a sort of show of hands that they all want the employee code of conduct covered by the working group as well, then I will action that. Okay. But I won't form a part of the onward recommendation. That makes sense.
Yeah, it does. But so what you want is a confirmation that we support that.
Yeah.
Can we do that through a quick show of hands now? Sorry, I'm conscious your hand's up, Councillor Loudon. We'll come to you John will come to you in a second, if that's okay. Could we just have a quick straw poll on supporting what Henry's suggesting about taking the two bits forward?
Green ticks for yes.
No, sorry, green ticks for yes, and red crosses for no, and for committee members only, just for Councillor Miller.
So you got 4. Okay, so that's fine.
Well, I think that's done then. So thank you for that, committee. And Councillor Loudon, you wanted to speak.
Yeah, I'm sorry to keep coming back in, Chair. I just wanted to follow on from the conversation you and Henry have just been having, and to follow on from what Robert said a minute ago. And I refer you to what I put in the chat. And as you know, Chair, one of the reasons why you were proposed to be chair of Personnel Committee was to give a degree of overlap between the whole issue of the probity of being chair of council, giving reassurance and probity for staffing matters through personnel, and also ditto for standards. So we very much, you and I saw the need to link them up. Therefore, linking the employee code into the Personnel Committee as well, once the work is done, I think would be a useful exercise. It also, because of the constitutional arrangements of that committee, does give the trade union representatives the opportunity formally to have their comments made. So if you need to, I'll put that as a recommendation, or you deal with it as you will, Chair.
Well, thanks for that, John. Well, I mean, I absolutely agree with you. Do we need to, again, formally do you want a formal, informal vote, Henry, on this or not?
Chair, I think it rather depends on what the working group do. I mean, if the working group review it and suggest no changes, I'm not sure anything really needs to happen with it. So I would suggest you wait until the working group have done their bit. It necessarily will, if there are changes, or in fact, either way, it's necessarily going to have to come back to this committee. And I think at that point, I would suggest it's linked across into personnel. I absolutely accept the point, and it makes perfect sense. But I wouldn't necessarily, I wouldn't advocate taking it there as a matter of course if the working group are ultimately happy with what it says.
Fair enough. I'm happy with that, unless anybody's got any violent disagreement. Are you happy with that, John? Okay, well let's do that.
I've made a note, Chair.
I wouldn't expect you to forget. So, I mean, I think we've pretty much covered everything off, unless there's anything anybody wants to pick up from Appendix 1 or Appendix 2. Well, Appendix 1 we've done, but Appendix 2, which is the Code of Conduct Complaints update. Is there anything you would like to draw to our attention from that, Henry, that's specific or not?
Not specifically in relation to the complaints. I mean, hopefully members will see, and I've obviously apologised previously for some of the backlog that's occurred. It's starting to clear a bit. There is still a slight time delay in progressing some of this, but I am working hard to try and move things forward in a more timely manner than the last 8+ months has allowed me. So they are moving forward. Hopefully you can see that in the updates. But if anybody has any particular questions or comments on it, then obviously I'm happy to look at individual ones.
I'm not getting any marigolds again. So on that basis, I would actually like to raise a quick question myself, and I wouldn't expect you to respond in any great detail. Are there any, going right to the back page, we've got complainants who've made more than 2 complaints. There are 2 highlighted there, and subject members who are the subject of more than 2 complaints. How do we deal with where there appears to be, well, for whatever reason, to understanding why a particular pattern of behaviour might have happened, why we might have particular individuals that have found themselves wishing to make a significant number of complaints, or why it should be that any individual members, how we deal with that in relation to any individual members attracting a significant number of complaints? Or am I overthinking it again, just to quote Councillor Loudon?
So the need for the desire for this information was former Councillor Hull, who sat on the committee and was quite keen to understand where, and particularly he was interested in councillors, I think, where you had repeat offenders essentially. But the committee felt if you were having repeat offenders, then actually you want to know who are repeat complainers as well, serial complainers. So it all came from that. I think it's fair to say that in terms of all the subsequent conversations we've had about it, actually we've never really picked through the detail of it, of trying to work out what the reasons may be. You obviously need to have background information that sits behind as to the who and the what to really get a feel for it. All I would say is that in relation to the ones that I can think of, there are certain members who do end up getting people's back up or doing something that causes people to be concerned and therefore are subject to complaints. The reality of it is there's not a huge amount you can do other than, let's just say you impose sanctions for training, whatever it might be, is to try and educate individuals and try and get them to learn. There are some who just don't, and it's very difficult to do anything about that because, I mean, to quote the case that allowed us to establish that training was a lawful sanction, effectively it's the ballot box that dictates whether or not anybody considers a councillor is fit to hold office, and that's part of the reason why the process has already been changed to ensure that breach notices are being published on the website. So from the member's perspective, I think there's probably not a huge amount you can do. We can simply flag up that training's not been done, or it's been imposed, it's not been done, and try and sort of do a facilitative route, if you like. But ultimately, the ballot box is king in all of that, and the public will understand, or public will know and be able to act on that now. For the complainers, there is a balance between somebody being seen to be a vexatious complainer and simply going after the same individual, say, or the same council or whatever. And they are much more difficult because obviously there's a degree of legitimacy, some would say, to somebody constantly going after an individual. But then actually, at what point does it cross over to becoming vexatious or persistent? I do have, within our existing protocol, there is the ability to say that somebody is being vexatious, or that it's tit for tat or politically motivated. So there are cutouts that can be used. I have to say, I think I'm not really aware of any where it's transgressed into the vexatious or that sort of area, really. I think there's a degree of genuineness about all of them. And I suppose you can have a subjective view, can't you? Is it genuine, or is it somebody just making trouble because they can? But for me, if the behaviour is demonstrably unacceptable in sort of first blush terms, then it should go forward, I think, unless it is so clearly vexatious or persistent. I think it's a much higher threshold, really. So it's there because Councillor Hull wanted to see it. But as I say, it's not really been explored massively since we've been putting that information there. I think it will become more meaningful now as breach notices are published. Previously, of course, it was just numbers against the spreadsheet, but now you can cross-reference those numbers against the breach reports that are published. And so actually it will start to hold a bit more meaning now, I think, because it's also the complainant's information that will be in those breach notices. Sorry, that's probably rather long-winded saying probably not very much.
I think where I was coming from is that it was, I was reading it as it stood, and it wasn't really, I was questioning, well, what conclusion am I meant to draw from this? Yeah. Because, for example, there's one councillor has been subject to 7 what I assume are discrete complaints. Now, you know, on the basis of one for rights or for wrongs in 13 years has not been subject to or complained or made any complaints in either direction. It's just, it just makes me think, well, what is going wrong there? You know, for me, I just want to look behind something like that and see what was actually driving that behaviour. Because for me, any complaints made in any circumstances really represent a level of failure. Because the fact that it's got something has got this far means that, you know, it hasn't been possible to resolve it properly through understanding at an earlier stage, which I think has got to be something that's desirable in virtually all circumstances. And similarly, that clearly there are, you know, there are 2 complainants who've made four one assumes again unrelated discrete complaints. And anyway, you see where I'm coming from. I'm just looking from a behavioural point of view. It strikes me as worthy of, if it's there, it's worthy of further investigation. I mean, and just it's a personal thought. I don't know how we'd actually pick that up without cutting across some of the basic rights of the individual complainants or complainees. Yes,
and I mean, I hope I can give the reassurance to the committee that these don't sit in isolation. You know, I do my damnedest to try and stop them coming through and to resolve where I can, but sometimes these things are just not possible. And the adage, you can take the horse to water, but you can't make it drink. You know, that certainly has its place in relation to some of those who I have to deal with, whether they're complainants or subject members. And there are points at which there's nothing that can be done, and you just have to ride it and see how that pans out at the ballot box at a later date. I think members will recall that I've always been quite cautious in the sense of not urging that all decision notices are published because of the no smoke without fire. And damaging reputations. Well, I mean, the fact that you've asked those questions, Councillor Thomas, kind of reinforces that, you know, there is a worry that, well, what does that mean? What does it pertain to? Is there a systemic problem here? Well, they're not all breaches for a start, I suspect, and I think that it's right that although the information is there, so you can start to see whether there are trends, actually the premise of only publishing the breach notices is right. But I don't want you to think that that means there's nothing that sits before that process. You know, certainly the independent persons will be able to, well, certainly Pat will be able to attest to you know, the work that goes on to try and have that learning aspect to try and help councillors understand where things have gone wrong and to change. But there are a few that will not work on, and we will constantly end up in this situation. I make no judgment on that. You know, they have their reasons, whatever they may be, but there will always be problem cases that we simply cannot deal with through sort of the more informal approach.
Okay, well, thanks for that. That's useful, and hopefully it's useful background for some colleagues as well. I believe that we've covered all the business that was aimed today, other than just to make the recommendations that the standards committee on page 7, which are the 2 to be taken together. I believe we've got proposer and seconder for both. Is that correct? Is everybody happy that we round up now and move forward with those, voting on those recommendations? Yeah, good. Right. Well, on that basis, then, can we use the green peppers for yes and the red tomatoes for no, and on those 2 recommendations? Thank you.
Okay, Chair, I've got 5 votes for, no votes against, no abstentions. So that will be carried forward as a recommendation to Council. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That really brings this meeting to an end. And I'd like to thank everybody, including our live stream viewers on YouTube, for joining us. However, can I remind everybody present that the supporting officer will confirm when the meeting is no longer being recorded or going live. Until that point, please be aware that any comment made will be live and available to the public. Thank you very much, everybody.